this is what we're going to talk about. So here we have the blood in the lungs. So as you know, the main function of the lungs is to supply oxygen to the blood and to take out the carbon dioxide. So the blood in the lungs primarily comes from two circulations. You have your arterial circulation and your venous circulation. Now this is talking about the circulations in a general sense. So for the arterial circulation, you have a high pressure, a low flow type of circulation. So the reason why it has a higher pressure is because the blood from the arterial circulation is primarily pumped from the heart. Okay? So since your heart is a muscle, it has a lot of power to pump the blood and therefore having a higher pressure but a lower flow. Okay? In contrast with your venous circulation, so it's opposite with your arterial circulation, you have a low pressure but a high flow type of circulation. Okay?
Flow in the context of this discussion refers to the passive flow allowable inside a vessel.
So in your lungs, you have three types of circulation. You have your pulmonary circulation, your bronchial circulation, and your lymphatic circulation. So with your pulmonary circulation, you generally have your pulmonary arteries and your pulmonary veins. So your pulmonary arteries are very distensible types of vessels found in your lungs. So kung i-compare na siya kanina, your pulmonary artery should belong here, di ba? High pressure but low flow. But in this case, your pulmonary artery is high flow and also high pressure. So that's high flow and high pressure. The reason for this is because your pulmonary artery has connections, again, with your heart, which is a pump, and it is high flow because unlike other arteries, it has an extra capability of adapting to changes in flow. Okay, so mas distensible si pulmonary artery as compared to the other arteries in your body. Next, you have your pulmonary veins. So your pulmonary veins, these have the same capacity as those of your typical venous circulation. So it's still low pressure and high flow. Next, we have your bronchial vessels or your bronchial circulation. And underneath here, you have your bronchial arteries and your bronchial veins. So basically speaking, your bronchial arteries carry oxygenated blood and your bronchial veins carry deoxygenated blood, and they supply specifically the little parts or the bronchioles found in your lungs. Next, you have your lymphatic circulation. So in general, lymphatics play a role in keeping homeostasis of fluids. There are a lot of lymphatic vessels found in your lungs. So this is the mechanism that keeps your lungs, in a sense, it keeps it dry. Okay? So if we take a look at this little diagram we have here, so basically this is your artery and this is your vein. And where they meet in the middle, you have your capillary. Your lymphatic vessels, they are considered to be closed-ended. So what this means is that, so if you take a look at this, again, this is your artery, this is your vein, and this one here are your lymphatic vessels. So as you can see, they are closed-ended. So diinhalin ang ilang na ang fluid inside your lymphatic vessels. Okay, so since they are closed-ended, they can only be opened by changes in volume or pressure. So for example, between your artery and your vessels and your capillaries, as they are exchanging certain nutrients or certain substances, there are some particles that are leaking to your interstitial space. So along that process, may ara na yung leak. So what your lymphatic system will do, specifically and especially in your lungs to keep it dry, is that your lymphatic vessels will open, okay, because mas taas ang pressure na sa interstitial space because may nag-leak na ng particles. Okay? So your lymphatic vessels will open and it will take in all those extra na particles and fluid. Okay? And eventually, it will drain it. It will pass by your entire lymphatic system. But don't worry, we'll discuss more about this during your midterms. So we have here a statement. Pressures in the pulmonary circulation are blank than the systemic circulation. So to compare the two, when we're talking about your pulmonary circulation, it is between your lungs and your heart. This is your pulmonary circulation. When we're talking about systemic circulation, it is now between your heart and your system, or the rest of your body. The pressures in your pulmonary circulation will have to be lower than your systemic circulation, because if you take a look at it, the distance between your heart and your lungs are not that much. So a lesser pressure is needed for the system to function. And in comparison with your systemic circulation, the blood from the heart needs to pump to get up to your head, to get down to your hands, to your toes. So it would require a higher amount of pressure. Okay, so typically speaking, again, pressure in pulmonary circulation lower than systemic circulation. Why? Because of the proximity. And next, we have here relationship of the heart and lungs.
This is a blood flow. It starts from the right heart, gets to the lungs, gets to the left heart, and eventually gets to the system. And from there, it makes its circulation and eventually drains back towards your right heart. But in a left-sided heart failure, for example, what happens is that the left heart fails to pump blood towards the system. So this flow is not possible. Or even if it's possible, there's only a small amount being given from the left heart to the system. So it's not as efficient. What happens then is that blood starts to pool in the lungs. So ma-accumulate ang blood inside the lungs and as well as other fluids that should have been already put out into the system. So this is what causes pulmonary edema.
Okay, now let's talk about blood volume inside the lungs. So as you know, blood flows through the vessels found in your lungs. Diba, you have your pulmonary circulation. Okay, so the lungs can also serve as a blood reservoir because approximately 450 ml, or that is 9% of the total blood volume in your body, passes through your lungs. Meaning, ang amuning amount, amuning percent, is found in your pulmonary vessels at any given time. Okay? But that amount can vary depending on some physiological causes or some pathological causes. It can decrease or it can increase. So an example I have here is your Valsalva maneuver.
Usually associated with weightlifting activities, this shunts blood from the lungs to the system. What happens is, as you attempt to exhale with the airways closed, it increases your intrathoracic pressure, forcing your heart and lungs to pump the blood outside.
So there are also some cardiac pathologies that affect the blood volume in the lungs.
With hemorrhages, for example, blood can shunt from the lungs to the system to aid with the blood loss, but it doesn't help that much.
Now let's proceed to blood flow through the lungs and its distribution. So take note, your pulmonary vessels are highly distensible. Diba? So when we see the word distensible, ano siya gani? There is a high degree of compliance or accommodation. So if there is an increase in blood volume or blood pressure, your pulmonary vessels are able to properly adapt to it. So for example, with increased volume or pressure, blood volume being example, or blood pressure, your pulmonary vessels can accommodate by dilating. Okay? Ma-expand sila, i-accommodate nila ang increased volume or pressure. So in the lungs, kung may decreased oxygen, the mechanism is to constrict the pulmonary vessels. While in the system, there is dilation of the peripheral vessels. So opposite sila. The reason for the constriction happening in the pulmonary vessels of the lungs is to
shunt the blood or redirect the flow to areas of the lungs with better aeration, or kung diin functional, dara ipadala ang blood but at the same time skipping areas that have poor aeration or are less functional.
For the system, so there is dilation of the peripheral vessels. So this mechanism naman niya
Is to have blood be able to easily enter tissues or organs that require more blood or oxygen, because remember, this is a scenario that happens with decreased oxygen concentration.
and also with this mechanism, your ANS, specifically your sympathetic system, has an influence on your pulmonary vein with constriction specifically. So that's why when your fight or flight response is activated, your pulmonary vein actually becomes constricted. Again, the reason for that is for blood in the lungs to go to areas of the lungs with better aeration, and at the same time, system vessels can dilate. Kumbaga, pakanto sa amoy na mechanism ang blood to areas that require more oxygen.